There are two qualities that every person needs in order to make it safely and successfully through this life. There are other qualities, of course, but these two are of extreme importance. One of them is courage. Not to be afraid. The other is not to minimize yourself, to have confidence. Courage and confidence are needed by everyone. Years ago, when I first became a minister, I think I couldn't have been over 23, 24 years of age. I went one Sunday to preach in the chapel of Wesleyan University at Middletown, Connecticut. I think in those days they required chapel attendance on Sunday because I had a full house. After the service was over, I was taken home for dinner by an elderly professor whom everyone up there at that time seemed to venerate. It's been so long ago that I have forgotten his name, but I've not forgotten him. After a good dinner, we went in and sat before the fire on that bitter, cold February Sunday afternoon. And he said to me, "Son, before you go, I'd like to say something to you. I have been working with students all my professional life. And I find that so many of them are lacking in two important qualities. And you're not much beyond that student age yourself. So I want to say to you, get courage and keep it, get confidence and never let it go." And he handed me a little book entitled Courage by J.M. Barrie, which has been in my library ever since. That was the wise advice of a mellow, urbane, philosophical Christian gentleman. Then I noticed the other day in the newspaper the death of one of the greatest figures we ever had in New York, a man named Robert Moses. Died at 92. He has been acclaimed as the greatest builder America ever produced. And that in his day and generation he had more to do with the development of the urban life of the United States than any other person. He was first appointed to the state government in 1916, and he was still on the governmental payroll when he died at 92, which ought to be the envy of a great many politicians. He left this city 592 parks. He left the Lincoln Center Cultural Complex. He left the United Nations building. When he became a public official, there were 39 states that didn't have one single park. 29 states. When he passed away, they had 3.5 million acres of parkland. His name is on the great parks of the state of New York. He left this city with 35 marvelous highways, so that the highway system of New York City is greater than that of Los Angeles. Tremendous personality. One day I got a telephone call from him, and he said, Reverend, I want to talk with you, and I'd like to ask you if you'd be so courteous to come down to my office, because I have some maps and things that I couldn't very well lug up to your office. Will you do that? I went down. They accused him of being a personification of the Emperor Titus, who built ancient Rome. And when I was in his office, the walls were lined with maps of what New York City was going to become. I didn't know about this Titus business, but I said, you remind me of a Roman emperor building a city. He said, that's what my critics call me, Titus. Now I said, Doctor, I've got to give you some bad news. We want to put the greatest highway we've yet built across Manhattan Island. And it's going to go between 30th Street and 29th Street. And it's going to take in all the territory that lies between those two streets. Now, he said, the only thing that gives me pause is your church there on the corner. I don't like to lay my hands on the house of God. But he said, I just wondered, I figure you as a progressive young fella, and that you like innovation, whereupon he was softening me up, I realized. He said, we've got a better neighborhood where your church ought to be. And I just wondering how you might respond to the offer of a nice piece of land adjacent to New York University in Washington Square. And we'll give you that land free. Think of that. And that land is worth a lot of money. And I said to him, how much extra will you give me to build the church with? He said, now you're talking business. You're not talking like a preacher. You're now talking business. Well, I said, if you were in my business, you'd know you have to be a businessman. Well, he said, I'd have to take that up with the power that is. And I said, so would I. I'd have to take it up with the church, and I don't believe they'd go for it. Because that church has been there ever since 1854. He says, you never talk antiquity, it's progress. Well, I came back and I laid it before the elders and deacons, and their lack of enthusiasm was noticeable. Whatever happened to the project, I was never sure whether this little incident stopped it or whether there wasn't enough money. I think it was the latter. But in my various conversations with Robert Moses, and I had several, he made a profound impression on me. He said the thing to do is to get something done if you believe in it. Never let anything stop it. But something stopped that one. But in most cases, he succeeded. I said to him one day, you are one of the great figures of our time. You're called the greatest builder in American history. How did you become this? He said, the answer to that is very simple. I do my homework. And when I'm convinced that a project is right, I won't let anybody stand in my way. He said, not the governor, not the president, not the mayor, nobody. And I said, that takes courage. He says the word is guts. And add to that confidence in yourself that you know and you are right. And then he came over and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, what would you add to that? I said, how about prayer to God? He said, that's what I wanted you to say. Courage, confidence, and prayer to God. So in my personal experience, these two men, the professor at Wesleyan and this great builder, both said, courage and confidence are essential ingredients in life. Now, how do you get them? You get them by faith, by the constant reading of the Bible, by practice, and by what you might call a spiritual inner build-up. If you come to church every Sunday and are re-inspired in your faith, that would be 52 inoculations of faith built into you. And then if you read the Bible every morning and every night and you pray and you walk with Jesus Christ, you build faith into you. Once I was writing a book in Switzerland at a place called Bergenstock up in the high mountains. It's run by a man named Fritz Frey. His father, Friedrich Frey, was probably one of the greatest hotel men of the greatest hotel nation in the world. He also was head of the Swiss Power Company. And I was sitting there one day working on this book, which was called You Can If You Think You Can, when he came along and he asked me about the book. And he said, I want to tell you something. When my father was a young student, he was very timid. He was self-conscious. He had no faith in himself. Then my father was ill for a solid year. Had to stay in his room, in bed. And he read the Bible through 3 times in that year. My father became one of the most courageous men I ever knew. He became a man of such great confidence that he built this great industry and said, young Mr. Fry, if my father had to walk a precipice 2 feet wide with a 1,000-foot drop-off on the left and on the right, he could do it without the blinking of an eye, because he had built faith into himself, and it produced courage and strength. Now, you know, whatever you build into you that's good will be yours forever, and you can rely upon. That's why you go to school, to build knowledge into you, because when you're 60, 70, 80 years of age, you're going to need some of this, and it's put into the consciousness, and then it sinks by a process of intellectual osmosis into the unconscious, and when you need it, there it is. So if you build know-how in yourself, you have this to draw upon. Like not long ago, there was a little boy named Kevin Adachi. He lived in East Lansing, Michigan. He was a very active boy, running at the height of his speed constantly. There was a plate glass door, and it was so clean that it was invisible. So Kevin didn't see it. Running at full speed, he smashed into this door of glass, and there were 100 fragments and shards scattered all around, and one went into his neck. And the blood began to gush out. He'd hit the jugular vein, and within a minute or two would bleed to death. There was a passerby by the name of George Foreman, about 40 years of age. He grabbed up the little boy. He saw the situation. He didn't know what to do. He had no training in medicine or in first aid. No one else was there to help. He held a little fellow in his arms, bleeding to death rapidly. And all that George could do was to say, "Dear Jesus, please help me." And Jesus did, because there flashed up in George's consciousness a chart. What to do in case a person is bleeding to death that he had learned as a little boy in the Boy Scouts, and he hadn't thought of it for years. But Jesus brought it up out of the subconscious. There was this flashback in utter clarity, and he followed it, and he put his thumbs on the place that would stop the bleeding, and it did stop, and he held it that way until the paramedics could come. And they said to him, "How did you know what to do?" He said, "Jesus told me, reminded me." You see, that was a case of a combined spiritual and intellectual build-up. Build faith into you every single day of your life, and you will have the courage and the power and the confidence to handle a situation. Now, you don't only get this in the pulpit, you get it in all kinds of magazines. This magazine is called Muscle and Fitness, and it's got a picture of a terrific figure there. What a man. And somebody sent me this. I don't happen to subscribe to it, but maybe I should. There's an article here by a man named Mike Shattuck on a page that says psychology. But he says, if you're starting out in bodybuilding, you've got not only to lift the right weights in the right way, but you got to think right. Now, he said, the late Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. What do you think about that? Now, I've been late a lot of times, but never that late. Yeah, boy, I'm really going to frame this one. Who was it? Mark Twain said that the reports of his death was an exaggeration. This gives you an idea of what they might say if you weren't around at that. Said the late Dr. MVP, who might have known little about weight training per se, but was one of the world's leading experts on the power of positive thinking, so forth. Well, then he goes on down here. I was nearly so floored I didn't read on, but I did. Now he says, if you are trying to build your body with weights, you don't want to do it. And you know you have to, or you're going to have a guilty feeling. So you come up to the weights, and you say, oh, dear me, why do I have to do this? And you don't do it. Now I said, what you do, based on this positive idea, you walk up to the weights, you stand to your full height, you look at the weights, and you say, I am superior to you. Then you pick them up. Doesn't that apply to a chocolate ice cream sundae if you're on a diet? I am superior to you. Then I thought that could be added too, so he went on and he says, you say to yourself, as you are now, I won't settle for you. I am superior to you. Ever say that to yourself? In the name of Jesus, you can do illimitable great things with yourself. If you say to yourself as you are, I don't want to be the way you are now. I want to be a greater self. I am superior to the way I am now. This will bring you courage. This will bring you confidence. This will bring you power to build up faith in the mind. How long have you been going to church, hearing the Bible read? You listen to it? I've been reading the New Testament lately as though I'd never read it before in my life. I walked up to the first verse in Matthew. I'd never seen Matthew before in my life. And the same with Mark and Luke and John. And you know what you find out? What the teaching of those four books is? If you have faith, you can achieve. If you have faith in Jesus, you can get well. If you have faith in Jesus, you can have courage and confidence and overcome. That is a fact. Perhaps the greatest fact in personality development.